Picture this. It's October 1967, and country music's most dangerously handsome heartbreaker is crawling through the suffocating darkness of Nickajack Cave. His powerful frame, once 200 pounds of pure masculinity, now reduced to a skeletal 150 pounds. Johnny Cash, the man in black who made women's hearts race across America, had reached his absolute breaking point. But here's what will make your heart skip. Salvation isn't waiting in that cave of despair. It's waiting in the form of a married woman whose very presence set his soul on fire. A woman with eyes like whiskey and honey, and a voice that wrapped around his broken heart like silk. This woman will write Ring of Fire about the exquisite agony of falling for a man she has no right to love. When she finally surrenders to that forbidden passion on a stage in London, Ontario, it will either destroy them both or transform Johnny from a walking ghost into the most devoted husband in music history. This isn't just another celebrity love story. This is the tale of how one woman's fierce love literally pulled a man back from the grave, proving that sometimes the most powerful force on earth is a heart that refuses to give up. By the end of this video, you'll understand the 6 soul-deep principles that can make love a force of redemption, even when everything seems lost. J.R. Cash wasn't born broken, but the Arkansas cotton fields had a way of crushing spirits under their relentless sun. Born February 26, 1932, young Johnny learned early that survival meant enduring whatever life threw at you. But nothing could have prepared this sensitive boy for the moment that would haunt every breath, every relationship, every tender touch he'd ever know. It was a Saturday morning in 1944. 12-year-old Johnny faced a choice that would torture him for decades. Go fishing with his beloved older brother Jack, his protector, his hero, his best friend, or work in the fields for extra money. Johnny chose work, and 3 hours later, Jack was severely injured in an accident at the high school shop class. For 3 agonizing days, Johnny watched his brother fight for his life in a hospital bed that reeked of disinfectant and impending loss. Jack's final words to his little brother were about seeing angels coming for him, about going to heaven. Johnny held Jack's hand as the light faded from his eyes, and something inside the boy's soul shattered so completely it would take decades to find all the pieces. The what-if became Johnny's secret poison, more deadly than any substance he'd later consume. What if I'd gone fishing? What if I'd been there to protect Jack? What if I'd insisted we skip work that day? The guilt metastasized through his soul like cancer, whispering constantly that he was somehow responsible for his brother's death, that he should have been the one to go instead. How unresolved trauma creates walls that keep us from authentic connection, even with those who love us most. By the time Johnny married Vivian Liberto in 1954, he was already a man carrying invisible wounds that bled into everything he touched. Vivian was 19. Beautiful as a summer morning, and completely unprepared for the darkness that lived inside her handsome new husband. She caught glimpses of it, the way Johnny would stare into space for hours as if watching ghosts, the nightmares that made him wake up screaming Jack's name, the way he flinched when anyone showed him too much affection, as if he didn't deserve tenderness. Fame amplified everything. When I Walk the Line and Folsom Prison Blues made Johnny Cash a household name, the guilt only grew heavier. How dare I be successful when Jack will never grow up, never have children, never taste the sweetness of dreams coming true? The little white pills doctors handed out to touring musicians became Johnny's escape hatch from the unbearable weight of being alive when his brother was not. At first, it was just 1 amphetamine to stay awake during 18-hour drives between shows. Then 2, then handfuls, chased with whatever alcohol he could find. The pills didn't just keep him awake. They silenced the voice in his head that constantly whispered, "You should be gone. not Jack. You should be the one in that grave. How we unconsciously punish ourselves for traumas that weren't our fault, often destroying everything good in our lives. Vivian tried everything to reach the man she'd fallen in love with. She waited up nights when he was on tour, her heart jumping every time the phone rang, hoping he'd call and sound like himself again. She planned special dinners for when he came home, only to watch him pick at his food with hands that shook like autumn leaves, his pupils so dilated she could barely see the blue of his eyes that had once looked at her like she was the most precious thing on earth. She gave him 4 beautiful daughters, Roseanne, Kathy, Cindy, and Tara. But Johnny was becoming a ghost in his own home, haunting the halls of a life he felt he didn't deserve. The worst part? Johnny hated himself for hurting them. He could see the fear creeping into his daughter's eyes when Daddy came home sick again. He could see Vivian aging years and months, trying to hold their family together while her husband slowly dissolved before her eyes like sugar in rain. But the pills had become his oxygen. Without them, the guilt was so crushing he couldn't draw breath, couldn't think, couldn't exist. They were no longer recreation or even medication. They were life support for a spirit that had forgotten how to feel anything naturally. By 1960, Johnny Cash was one of country music's biggest stars and one of its most tortured souls. He had everything a man could want, but inside, he was drowning in 12-year-old guilt that no amount of success could wash away. But someone was about to enter his life who would see straight through the pills and the fame to the wounded boy underneath. Someone who would refuse to let him destroy himself, no matter how hard he tried. Her name was June Carter, and she was about to become either his salvation or his final destruction. While Johnny Cash was learning to carry the weight of impossible guilt, Valerie June Carter was being raised to carry the weight of country music itself like a crown. Born June 23, 1929, in the mountains of Virginia, June didn't just grow up around music. She was born into its royal family. The Carter family had practically invented country music, and everyone expected little June to follow in those legendary footsteps. But June Carter was never going to be anyone's idea of a traditional Southern woman, and thank God for that. From the moment she could walk, June was performing, not because she had to, but because music lived in her bones like liquid fire. Her mother, Maybelle Carter, was already a legend, and June watched her navigate a man's world with steel wrapped in silk and honey. Maybelle taught her daughters that being a woman didn't mean being weak, and being talented didn't mean being apologetic about the gifts God gave you. How strong family foundations can give us the courage to love fearlessly, even when that love seems impossible. June's childhood wasn't all applause and spotlights, though. The Carter women were known for their fierce independence, but they paid a price for it in a world that preferred women quiet and compliant. June watched her mother balance career and motherhood in an era when women were supposed to choose one or the other, never both. She learned early that love meant fighting for what mattered, even when the whole world told you to give up and be grateful for what you had. By her 20s, June had already lived through heartbreak that would have shattered a weaker spirit. Her first marriage to honky-tonk singer Carl Smith had crumbled under the pressure of 2 competing careers and incompatible dreams about what marriage should look like. Carl wanted a wife who would quit performing and raise their daughter, Carlene, in domestic bliss, tending house and having dinner ready when he came home from touring. June tried. God, how she tried. But asking June Carter to stop performing was like asking her to stop breathing. The stage wasn't just her career. It was her soul's natural habitat. Discussing the challenges of maintaining personal identity within traditional relationship expectations. Then came her marriage to police officer Edwin "Rip" Nix. Rip was a good man who genuinely loved June with the kind of steady devotion that should have been enough. They had a daughter together, Rosie, who became the light of June's life. But Rip couldn't understand why his wife needed to be on stage when she already had everything a woman could want. A husband who adored her, two beautiful daughters, financial security, and a home where she was cherished. "Why do you need all that chaos and uncertainty?" he'd ask, his voice heavy with hurt. "Aren't we enough for you?" The question broke June's heart because she couldn't explain that it wasn't about them not being enough. It was about a part of her soul that only came alive under stage lights, in harmony with other voices, creating something bigger than herself. She was a bird in a golden cage, and everyone could see she was meant to soar. The difference between love that seeks to control and love that seeks to empower the other person's authentic self. That's when the Johnny Cash Show came calling. By the early 1960s, June was touring regularly with Cash as part of the Carter Family Act. She was married to Rip, trying desperately to make their relationship work. But something electric happened every time she shared a stage with the Man in Black, something that made her feel more like herself than she'd felt in years. June had been aware of Johnny Cash long before they worked together. Elvis Presley himself had introduced her to Johnny's music, dragging her to little cafes across the South and making her listen to his records on crackling jukeboxes. "You need to hear this man," Elvis had told her, his eyes bright with excitement. "He's got something different, something real." How sometimes we recognize our destiny long before we're ready to accept it. At first, June thought Johnny was just another troubled musician walking the well-worn path to self-destruction. She'd been around enough men in the industry to recognize the signs, the haunted eyes that seemed to see ghosts in broad daylight, the way he sometimes forgot lyrics mid-song as if his mind was somewhere else entirely, the tremor in his hands that had nothing to do with stage nerves. But as she watched him night after night, she began to see something else beneath the surface. She saw the way Johnny's whole face lit up when he talked about his daughters, speaking of them like they were made of starlight and dreams. She saw how he treated the crew with genuine respect, even when he was barely holding himself together. She noticed that his worst behavior always followed phone calls home, as if someone was constantly reminding him of all the ways he was failing. Most importantly, she saw the way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching. Not with the predatory hunger of so many men in the industry, but with something that looked like wonder, as if he was seeing something in her that he'd forgotten existed in the world. How authentic connection often begins with truly seeing and being seen by another person. The attraction between them was undeniable, crackling with an electricity that everyone around them could feel like static before a storm. When they performed together, their voices blended with an intimacy that made audiences feel like they were eavesdropping on private conversations between lovers. June would catch herself studying the way Johnny's mouth moved when he sang, memorizing how his eyes crinkled when he genuinely smiled instead of just performing one. Late at night, lying beside Rip while he slept peacefully, June would find herself replaying moments from the stage, the way Johnny's hand had brushed hers when they reached for the same microphone, how his voice had dropped to a whisper during their duet, as if he was singing only for her, the split second when their eyes met, and the rest of the world simply vanished. But June Carter wasn't naive. She'd been around enough addicted musicians to know that love couldn't cure what was eating Johnny alive from the inside out. She was married, he was married, and they were both carrying wounds that hadn't healed. Getting involved with Johnny Cash would be like dancing with a forest fire. Beautiful, consuming, and potentially deadly to everyone they loved. What June didn't know was that Johnny was about to reach his darkest hour in a way that would nearly destroy him. And when that moment came, she'd have to make the most important decision of her life. Walk away from the wreckage like any sensible woman would, or dive into the flames and try to pull him out. The choice she made would either save them both or destroy everything they'd worked for. London, Ontario, February 22nd, 1968. The stage lights blaze like captured stars, but Johnny Cash might as well be standing alone in his living room, because the only person who exists in his universe is the woman whose voice has been haunting his dreams for months. They've just finished Jackson, their bodies still humming with the electricity that cracks between them every time they perform together. Johnny's hands aren't shaking from pills tonight. They're trembling with the kind of desperate need that can drive a man to madness. He's proposed to June in hotel rooms and backstage whispers, always receiving the same heartbreaking answer. Not yet, John. Not like this. But something about tonight feels different. Maybe it's the way June's dress catches the stage lights, making her look like an angel wrapped in fire. Maybe it's how her eyes keep finding his during the song, holding his gaze just a heartbeat longer than friendship allows. Or maybe it's simply that Johnny Cash has reached the breaking point where living without her feels more impossible than facing public humiliation. Every night I watch her walk away, Johnny thinks, his heart hammering against his ribs like a prisoner demanding freedom. Every morning I wake up empty, knowing she's going home to another man. I can't keep pretending this isn't killing me. The Statler brothers are waiting in the wings for their cue. June's family, the legendary Carter clan, are watching from the shadows. The entire production should move to the next song. But Johnny finds himself frozen by a truth that burns brighter than the spotlights. He would rather risk everything than spend another day loving her in silence. How sometimes love requires the courage to act without guarantees, to risk everything on hope alone. June, he says, and his voice carries the weight of every sleepless night, every song he's written about her, every moment he's bitten back the words that could change everything. The arena falls silent, 7,000 people, somehow sensing they're about to witness something that will be talked about for decades. I've asked you this before, Johnny continues, his voice rough with emotion, that no amount of performing experience could disguise. But I'm asking you now, in front of all these people, because I want the whole world to know how completely you own my heart. Will you marry me? Time suspends itself like honey dripping from a spoon. June's mind races through every reason this is impossible. I'm married. He's married. This will destroy our families, ruin our careers. But her heart is screaming only one word. Yes, yes, yes. She looks into Johnny's eyes and sees not the troubled star who stumbles through performances, but the vulnerable man who once confessed he'd never believed in forever until he met her. In this moment, surrounded by thousands of strangers, she feels more seen and cherished than she ever has in the privacy of her own home. How authentic love recognizes itself instantly, even in the most imperfect circumstances. June's hand flies to her throat. A gesture Johnny has learned means she's overwhelmed by emotions too big for words. She looks out at the sea of faces watching them with bated breath, then back at Johnny, and in his eyes she sees something she's never seen before. Absolute certainty mixed with heartbreaking vulnerability. For months, June has been telling herself all the reasons why loving Johnny Cash is impossible. The scandal would destroy their careers. Her daughters need stability, not chaos. He's battling demons that could swallow them both whole. But standing here looking into Johnny's eyes while 7,000 people hold their breath, June realizes that all her careful reasoning has been drowning out the one voice that matters, her heart, which has been screaming yes since the first time they sang together. Yes, she whispers, and then louder, for everyone to hear. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. The crowd erupts in a roar that shakes the building to its foundations. Johnny pulls June into his arms, and when they kiss, it's not the kiss of two performers playing roles. It's the kiss of two people who have finally stopped running from their destiny. Two souls recognizing they've found their home in each other. How public commitment can transform private love into something larger than both people involved. But even as confetti falls and the audience cheers like the world just changed forever, both Johnny and June know this moment is just the beginning. They've declared their love, but they haven't solved any of the problems that made their relationship seem impossible. Johnny is still fighting a losing battle with addiction that could destroy him. June still has to go home to Rip and explain why she just accepted another man's proposal on live television. They both have children whose worlds are about to be turned upside down. Most crucially, Johnny is about to face the darkest period of his life, a descent into despair that will test June's love beyond anything she can imagine. The woman who just said yes to marrying him is about to discover whether her love is strong enough to pull a man back from the brink of destruction itself. Because in 8 months, Johnny Cash will crawl into a cave in Tennessee, reaching his absolute breaking point. And June's love will be the only thing standing between him and eternal darkness. The fairy tale proposal was beautiful, but reality hit like a sledgehammer the moment Johnny and June stepped off that stage. June still had to return to Nashville and face Rip, explaining to her husband why she'd just accepted another man's proposal on live television. Johnny had to confront Vivian, who had already filed for divorce but was watching their marriage end in the most public way possible. But the real enemy wasn't complicated divorces or scandal-hungry media. The real enemy was living inside Johnny's bloodstream, and it was about to wage war on everything he loved. June thought love would be enough. She'd seen Johnny at his best, brilliant, tender, capable of making her laugh until her sides ached, and she believed that her love could pull him back from whatever edge he was walking. What she didn't understand yet was that addiction doesn't care about love. It doesn't care about talent, or wedding plans, or the most beautiful woman in the world standing by your side. Understanding that love provides motivation for healing, but cannot replace the hard work of recovery. Johnny's dangerous dependency on prescription medication exploded after their engagement like a dam bursting under too much pressure. The stress of the divorces, the media attention, the weight of potentially destroying multiple families, it all fed the pharmaceutical beast that had been growing inside him for years. His substance use had reached catastrophic levels, massive quantities of amphetamines to function, barbiturates to sleep, anything he could get his hands on to silence the constant roar of guilt and self-hatred in his head. June watched the man she loved disappear before her eyes like smoke in wind. He'd show up to recording sessions so altered that he couldn't remember words to songs he'd written, his voice slurring like he was speaking through water. His weight dropped to a skeletal 140 pounds. His skin turned the color of old newspaper, and sometimes when he looked at her, there was no recognition, just the vacant stare of a man whose soul had checked out completely. 3 weeks after the proposal, June found Johnny in her dressing room doorway, swaying on his feet, his eyes unfocused and desperate. "What if I'm destroying you?" he whispered, not quite able to meet her gaze. "What if loving me is the biggest mistake of your life?" June's heart broke at the raw vulnerability in his voice. She approached him slowly, like you would a wounded animal. "Then we'll build something better," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something that can't be destroyed because it's built on truth, instead of pretending." When she finally placed her hands on his shoulders, he collapsed against her like he'd been holding himself upright through sheer willpower. How loving someone with addiction means learning to set boundaries, even when it feels like abandonment. The breaking point came in the summer of 1967. Johnny had been missing for 4 days when June finally found him in a hotel room in Memphis, unconscious on the bathroom floor, experiencing a serious medical emergency. She called an ambulance, held his hand as paramedics worked to revive him, and made a decision that would define their relationship forever. When Johnny finally opened his eyes in the hospital, June was sitting beside his bed, but her usual warmth was nowhere to be seen. Her spine was straight, her voice steady as granite. "John," she said, using the name only she called him, "I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. But I will not watch you destroy yourself. If you want to be with me, you have to choose, the pills or me. You cannot have both." It was the ultimatum that terrified Johnny more than any medical crisis. Losing June felt worse than dying, but the pills had such a stranglehold on his nervous system that he couldn't imagine existing without them. They were no longer recreation or even medication. They were life support for a spirit that had forgotten how to feel anything naturally. How addiction creates a cycle of promises made and broken, testing love beyond human limits. What followed were months of torment for both of them. Johnny would get clean for days, sometimes weeks, and June would allow herself to hope. They'd write songs together, make plans for their wedding, dream about the family they'd build together. But then the weight of reality would crash down. A memory of Jack, a phone call from his estranged daughters, the simple terror of facing life without chemical armor, and he'd disappear again. June developed survival strategies that no fiancé should need. She learned to hide her purse so Johnny couldn't steal money for substances. She memorized every emergency room between Nashville and Los Angeles. She became fluent in the language of addiction, the dilated pupils that meant uppers, the slurred speech that meant downers, the trembling hands that meant withdrawal was setting in. But it was the psychological warfare that nearly broke her spirit. Johnny, in his drug-fueled paranoia, would accuse her of betraying him, of planning to leave him, of never really loving him at all. "You don't know me," he'd snarl during his worst moments, his beloved face twisted into something she barely recognized. "You fell in love with a fantasy. The real me is garbage, June. Pure garbage. Don't you dare tell me who I love," she'd fire back, her own fire matching his. "I've seen you at your worst and your best, and I choose you anyway. But I won't watch you choose destruction over the life we could have together." How trauma and addiction create self-sabotage patterns that push away the very people trying to help. The absolute lowest point came in October 1967, when Johnny made his way to Nickajack Cave in Tennessee. According to his own autobiography, Cash was exhausted and had no idea who he was anymore as he entered the massive cave system that stretched for miles underground. He crawled for nearly 3 hours until his flashlight died, then lay down in the absolute darkness, surrendering to complete despair. As Cash later wrote, "The absolute lack of light was appropriate, for at that moment I was as far from God as I had ever been. But in that cave, something profound happened." Cash said he became conscious of a very clear, simple idea. I was not in charge of my destiny. I was not in charge of my own fate. How sometimes we must face our darkest moments alone before we can accept the love being offered to us. Cash began to feel a sensation of utter peace, clarity, and sobriety, and started focusing on God instead of his pain. Following a faint breeze and moving slowly through the darkness, he eventually saw light and made his way to the cave entrance. When he emerged, squinting in the daylight like a man reborn, June and his mother were waiting with a basket of food, telling him they knew something was wrong and were compelled to come and find him. How genuine love creates an intuitive connection that transcends physical distance and logical explanation. On the drive back to Nashville, Johnny looked at June with eyes that seemed clearer than they'd been in years. "God saved me from destroying myself," he said simply. But June was too smart to believe that one spiritual experience would cure years of addiction. She'd watched Johnny make promises before, seen him swear on everything sacred that he would change. This time felt different. There was a clarity in his eyes she hadn't seen since they first met, but June knew the real work was just beginning. The man who had crawled into that cave in complete despair had emerged ready to fight for his life, and June was ready to fight beside him no matter how long the battle took. The Johnny Cash who emerged from Nickajack Cave wasn't instantly cured. Recovery doesn't work like that, much as we might wish it did. But something fundamental had shifted inside him, like a compass needle finally finding true north. For the first time in years, he wanted to live more than he wanted to escape. June became his partner in healing in ways that went far beyond romance. When withdrawal symptoms hit, the violent shaking, the crushing depression that made existence feel impossible, the voices in his head screaming for just one pill to make it stop, June was there with unwavering presence. But she was too wise to enable his addiction. She insisted Johnny work with doctors who understood recovery, not the pill-pushing physicians who had fed his dependency for years. How genuine partnership means supporting someone's highest potential, not their dysfunction. By November 11th, 1967, Johnny stood on stage performing sober for the first time in over a decade. The terror he'd felt about facing audiences without chemical armor proved unfounded. As he later said, "The stage without substances was not the frightening place I'd imagined it to be. Instead, it became sacred ground where he could finally be fully present, for the music, for June, for himself." They began creating music together that reflected their journey from darkness to light. Songs like Jackson and It Ain't Me, Babe became more than performances. They were testimonies to the healing power of authentic partnership. June's voice provided the harmony Johnny's soul had been searching for, while his bass baritone gave weight to her soaring melodies. Together, they created something neither could have achieved alone. How shared creativity can become a foundation for deeper intimacy and mutual growth. On March 1st, 1968, just 1 week after that London proposal, Johnny and June were married in Franklin, Kentucky. June wore a light blue dress with matching flowers in her hair, and they held a non-alcoholic reception at Johnny's home in Hendersonville. But the real triumph wasn't the wedding ceremony. It was that Johnny showed up present, clear-eyed and genuinely joyful, ready to promise his life to the woman who had saved it. The most profound healing happened when June approached Johnny's relationship with his daughters. His connection with Roseanne, Kathy, Cindy, and Tara had been collateral damage in his addiction and divorce. They were suspicious of June, hurt by their father's choices, and protective of their wounded mother. How healing one relationship often requires healing all the relationships it has impacted. June didn't try to replace their mother or pretend their father's mistakes hadn't caused real damage. Instead, she showed them through consistent actions that she was committed to helping their father become the man and the father he was capable of being. She attended school events without being asked, remembered birthdays when their own father forgot, and most importantly, never spoke against Vivian or minimized the girl's pain. The breakthrough came when Johnny's daughter, Roseanne, then 18, approached June at a family gathering and said simply, "Thank you for bringing my daddy back to us." How authentic love creates ripple effects that heal entire family systems. In 1970, Johnny and June welcomed their son, John Carter Cash, creating a blended family that united her daughters, Carlene and Rosie, with his 4 daughters. But the real miracle was that they had created something neither had experienced in their previous marriages. A partnership where both people could be fully themselves without fear of judgment or abandonment. Johnny's recovery wasn't perfect. Healing rarely is. There were slips and struggles, moments when the old demons whispered seductively about the ease of pharmaceutical escape. But now he had something he'd never possessed before. A partner who loved him enough to hold him accountable, without trying to control him. One evening, after a particularly difficult day when Johnny had confessed to June that he'd been tempted to use again, she took his face in her hands and said, "John, I don't love you because you're perfect. I love you because you're brave enough to keep choosing recovery, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." How authentic love provides support without enabling, accountability without judgment. Together, they turned their story into art that helped millions of other people struggling with similar battles. Professional collaborations like Jackson, If I Were a Carpenter, and Long-Legged Guitar Pickin' Man weren't just entertainment, they were testimonies to the transformative power of committed love between two people who refused to give up on each other. Cash often described their love as unconditional, and June helped him overcome his addictions by being there for him during numerous bouts of rehab, staying by his side through sobriety, and when he returned to using substances. But she never enabled his self-destruction. She loved him enough to fight for his life, even when he couldn't fight for it himself. How commitment to mutual growth creates love that deepens rather than diminishes over time. As Johnny wrote to June on her 65th birthday, "Sometimes we irritate each other a little bit. Maybe sometimes take each other for granted. But once in a while, like today, I meditate on it and realize how lucky I am to share my life with the greatest woman I ever met." The man who had once crawled into a cave in complete despair became an advocate for recovery, using his platform to show other addicts that redemption was possible. The woman who could have chosen an easier path became a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever loved someone struggling with addiction. Their love story lasted 35 years until June's death on May 15th, 2003. Johnny followed her just 4 months later on September 12th, 2003, unable to imagine a world without his lifeline. But their legacy wasn't just a beautiful romance, it was proof that love, when combined with wisdom and unwavering commitment, can literally save lives. Whether you're loving someone through their darkest hour or fighting your own battles, remember this: true love doesn't mean accepting destructive behavior. It means loving someone enough to hold them accountable to their best self. It means being willing to walk through fire together, but never enabling the flames. In a world that often treats love as disposable, Johnny and June showed us what happens when two people decide that their love is worth fighting for, no matter how long the battle takes or how many times they have to start over. What's one insight from this story that resonates with your own relationship experiences? Share in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more love stories that teach us about the art of lasting connection.